City of Northglenn, Channel 8, keeping you informed of events in your community.
Good evening and welcome to our November 19th City Council study session. Joanna, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Dodge.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Escobar.
Here.
Councilmember Sowers. Here. Councilmember Leidy will be absent. Councilmember Downey will be absent. Councilmember Brown. Here. Councilmember Whitman. Here. Councilmember Duran-Mullicup. Here. Councilmember Wilford. Here.
We have one item on our agenda tonight, and it is a presentation about Colorado Communities for Climate Action. And we have Jacob Smith. So, Jacob, I'll just hand it right over to you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Council, for having me this evening. I've got a short presentation, and then I'm happy to chat as long as you want to chat, answer questions, help explain how CC4CA works, whatever it is that's helpful to you in making your decision. I'm more than happy to take whatever time you need. And feel free to interrupt as I'm going through the short deck as well if questions pop up before I'm done. I'll start just by telling you that, well, first of all, CC4CA is a coalition. It's now 21 jurisdictions. Avon just joined last week. It's been roughly a new jurisdiction every couple of months, so it's been 6 since I first got involved with CC4CA about a year ago, and I think it's going to keep happening as we engage with more communities and more communities begin to think about climate change more in a more serious way. The coalition most fundamentally is a group of jurisdictions, counties, cities, towns, that concluded that climate change is really important to them. They're facing significant impacts as a consequence, and they are unable on their own as an individual, often small jurisdiction, to wield the kind of policy influence they need to change the policies that will affect climate in their own community. So there's organizations like the Compact for Colorado Communities, which are focused on empowering communities to do work in their own community, model code and how to do better sustainability practices within the jurisdiction. CC4CA is entirely focused on changing primarily state, and to some extent federal policy, so that individual communities across the state and the state writ large can accomplish their climate goals, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and protect our communities from the impacts of climate change. This is a list of the things that we do, the most important things we do. We basically advocate on behalf of local communities for improved policy at the state level on climate. A lot of that takes place at the legislature. It's kind of the marquee arena. So we have lobbyists, we run bills, we are very engaged in testifying on behalf of bills or in opposition to bills, working with legislators on language and amendments. This session is likely to be a lot more interesting because of the trifecta. So there's a lot of bills that have been either introduced in one chamber and didn't end up in the other one, or just been floating around and haven't been introduced at all, that may do some real good at the state level on climate impacts across the state, and particularly for local communities, the kinds of impacts we tend to experience. So there's a lot of opportunity to move bills, or bills that are moving already, to make sure they're finessed in a way that really do benefit local communities and what local communities need. We also spend a fair amount of time working at the executive branch level. We engage with the governor and the governor's office a lot. The governor obviously can do a lot of things through executive orders or programmatic decisions. We engage a lot at the agency level. There are a bunch of agencies like CDPHE and DNR that have a lot to do with things that happen at our level, at community, local government level on climate. And then also there are regulatory bodies or policymaking bodies like the Air Quality Control Commission that have a huge impact on what happens in our communities. And we are very engaged there. And I'll give you an example of one that just wrapped up last week that it's a really nice win just a week ago. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we do occasionally engage at the federal level. We focus on places where we think leveraging the collective footprint of a bunch of local jurisdictions in Colorado can have a real impact on the outcomes. And mostly that hasn't been the case at the federal level, but there may be opportunities. There have been occasionally times when we thought, okay, this is a place where local Colorado communities, local electeds and appointed officials at the local level might actually be able to shape outcomes, and we'll engage there. But the bulk of what we do is at the state level because the opportunities are just so much more prevalent, and local elected officials like you all and the other members of the coalition wield real influence at the state level with legislators, with commissioners on appointed commissions, and so on. I mentioned we just had this really nice win last week. This is a really good example of what CC4CA does. One of our priorities has been supporting steps that reduce carbon pollution from passenger transportation, passenger vehicles. And I'm happy to go into the details of the low emission vehicle standards that the Air Quality Control Commission just made a decision on last week, but I'll save that unless you're interested in it. The thing that the CC4CA did was say that's a real priority. We think we can make a real difference. We began last spring. We put together a letter signed by something like 60 elected officials around the state to Governor Hickenlooper that encouraged the governor to kick off this process of adopting these LEV, low emission vehicle standards. The Air Quality Control Commission then decided to take it up, and that was in August. We did a bunch of work to bring local elected officials there. We had a bunch of local elected officials do guest editorials across the state and prepared a bunch of testimony, did a bunch of things that helped put the needs of local communities on the map in front of the Air Quality Control Commission. They voted that night to officially begin that process. We then became a formal party to the rulemaking process, which meant we were able to provide very detailed technical testimony, again, very much from the perspective of local communities. What does climate change mean to local communities around the state and local governments, and what steps would make a difference for our ability to grapple with those changes? And then had the final step, which was the Air Quality Control Commission, their final big hearing and decision, which was last week, Thursday and Friday, and they ended up voting 8-0 to adopt these standards. There was one recusal, so an 8-0 vote, which I can't tell you precisely what percentage, how much credit exactly CC4CA gets, but there's no question, looking at the groups that participated, that the voices of local governments were immensely influential there, because the commissioners care a lot about what you all are closer to the ground in your communities than anybody on the Air Quality Control Commission and most of the people who work in state government, and they all know that, and so they value what you all are able to bring to venues like that. So that was a really nice win, and the local officials through CC4CA and other partners, that other individuals and groups that we collaborated with, ended up getting a really nice win that will help keep passenger vehicle fuel efficiency standards at where they were, rather than getting rolled back as they might do nationally. This is what CC4CA does not do. At the moment, all of our funding comes from local governments, and we may explore some grant funding this year, but even if we do that, still the bulk of our funding will come from local governments, from dues from local governments. And we run that money, we're administered through a 501c3 nonprofit. So we follow the rules of both kinds of entities. So we don't expend resources of any kind on engaging electoral politics. We don't do anything that either is or could be interpreted as endorsing or opposing a candidate or a party, and the same thing with ballot measures. So we stay very clear of anything that might cause problems for any of our members, all of which are local jurisdictions. Avon is not yet on this list, but
I added
we
it.
will add them. Oh, thank you. And now it's symmetrical, so we feel better.
No, I didn't do that.
These are all the jurisdictions you can see. They're all over the state. It ranges from Front Range to Western Slope, from very small rural communities to much larger communities that are grappling with all a different set of issues. Some are ski towns, some are suburbs. It's a really nice mix of communities, but all of them are part of the coalition because they care very much about climate change, the impacts to their communities, and wanting to effect change at the state level that will improve all those things. The main reason that these communities have joined is what I've been talking about. They have a commitment to acting on climate. They know they can't achieve their own climate goals, their own goals in their own community without state policy action. And they know that by working in collaboration with other local jurisdictions, they can wield much more influence, have a much bigger footprint at the state level than they can on their own. And that's what draws all of these communities here. There's some other things, varies by community, that I think are value propositions for the members. For instance, for a lot of jurisdictions or a lot of individual elected officials and sometimes staff that are part of the coalition, having opportunities to meet with legislators, to testify at the legislature or at other policymaking bodies like the AQCC last week, to talk to reporters about these issues, all of those kinds of things that are putting elected officials and the voices of local communities in front of the press and in front of legislators and decision makers, that we make that really easy. Our strength comes from precisely putting people like you all in positions where your voices are amplified and influential. And so for a lot of local elected officials, that's a real value add. Anybody who wants to testify or meet with legislators to advocate on behalf of these policies that help reduce carbon pollution, we make it as easy as possible. We help prepare people, help them with their talking points. For some of you may have a lot of experience at the legislature or testifying in venues like that, and then we can help make the connections, but you don't necessarily need us to help walk you through it. But a lot of elected officials at the local level don't have much experience, and it's a strength of ours to have lots of you speaking in those venues, and we make it as easy as possible. Some members join, I think, partly also because we do these trainings, which are mostly focused on things like how to talk about climate change in your communities, how to, the science. We stay very plugged into the most current science on the impacts of climate change and what's actually happening, especially, once again, thinking about the local level. What are the impacts to actual communities like Northglenn and counties and communities across the state that matter to you all in your own communities at that scale? And so we do trainings around that, and also about just the advocacy stuff, how to combine all of those pieces into effectively shaping outcomes. Like, for those of you who don't have a lot of experience at the state legislature, you probably know the sort of paper version of how legislation happens at the legislature, but how it actually happens is a very, very different process. And so that's the kind of thing in the trainings we spend time to make sure everybody understands, okay, here are the real levers, here are the conversations you need to have, here are the people that wield a lot of influence, even though it doesn't necessarily show up on paper, all that kind of stuff. We don't require anybody to do trainings, but we make it available to any community that wants. We've done, I think, 4 of them now in different parts of the state, and they've all been really productive. And then the other thing that pops up is, for some members at least, I've been meeting with all the jurisdictions in person, just traveling to all the jurisdictions and sitting down with the electeds and staff, and this has popped up much more than I would have expected. There's a real, people seem to value the relationships, the networking that comes out of the organization, because they're building relationships with other electeds and other staff across the state who are very focused on the same issues. This is a single purpose organization, and that's been apparently really high value for a lot of people to be able to figure out who else across the state cares a lot about these issues and what can they learn from those people, shared knowledge and experiences. So that's why these folks are all part of it. I would say most fundamentally, we can talk about the policy agenda, that's the core of participation, or core of the decision. For a community that cares about climate and goes through that climate agenda and generally agrees with what's in the climate agenda, in the policy agenda rather, and doesn't really oppose anything, nothing in there is really heartburn causing, that's kind of that's the threshold. Because if for you all, you look at that policy agenda and you don't care that much, or there are things in there that give you real heartburn, we're not going to be much value to you all, and you being part of the coalition isn't going to make the coalition stronger either. So I think the core of the decision for most communities at least is looking through that policy agenda, is this stuff that you all generally support? It doesn't mean that every one of you enthusiastically is a champion of every one of those 21 policy positions, but there's nothing on there that gives you real heartburn, and that generally you're supportive of those things. I know that your legislative committee reviewed that, and I read through the comments on that. I'm happy to answer questions about any of those, but I think that's probably the core of it. And if that's the case for you all, and it's important to you to be part of investing resources to give yourselves a bigger footprint at the state level on policy issues around climate, then CC4CA may make a lot of sense. And if not, then it's totally understandable. And we work with communities, we collaborate with communities that care about these issues and want to participate in the state legislature that aren't members, but it may not make sense to be a member if those things aren't the case. Just a couple more things I'll mention.
Jason, can you just go back just for a second?
Certainly.
Can you just address why, to me, there's a lot of glaring omissions from that? And is it because you're such a new organization that you haven't gotten cities like Denver, Colorado Springs, those types? Is there a reason why some of those are missing?
Oh yeah, it's a very new organization. The organization started about 3 years ago.
Okay.
When it started, it was a handful of jurisdictions that it was really that thought process. As individual jurisdictions, the state legislators who care about us are only our state legislators. Well, what if we were to pull together a coalition so that all of the legislators who represent any of our districts or any of our jurisdictions are going to pay attention to the whole group? It was that kind of thinking. And it started with communities you would expect, the ones that are traditionally really out in front, really leading edge on climate advocacy, like Boulder and Aspen and Boulder County and so on. But since then, it's grown steadily to include other communities that you don't necessarily think of that way: Frisco and Westminster and Summit County and Avon. I mean, they're not communities that are known for their anti-environmental advocacy, but they're not the communities you think of. So yeah, the growth now has basically been organic. It's been somebody knew somebody and reached out and said, hey, this might be interesting to us, and so we started the conversation. We're in a conversation with Denver. My guess is Denver will become a member at some point. Their internal, I'm sure this is not a surprise to you, their internal politics are very complicated, so decisions happen there much more slowly than they do in most communities. But we've been growing steadily precisely because those conversations keep happening among members, elected officials who have conversations with other elected officials and decide, oh, that might make sense, and then this conversation starts, yeah.
Okay, so it's word of mouth more than you made a big presentation to all the cities, which obviously you didn't do because you didn't come here, so it was
That's
all
right.
word of mouth. Okay.
Yeah,
I was
every
just curious.
single one of these has been a conversation that turned into let's explore further, that then turned into something like this, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then I think this is just the last thing I want to flag is the dues list. The base level, that's what it costs. That's the basic dues to become a member of the coalition. We ended up creating these other levels because there were multiple jurisdictions that wanted to give more. There's no difference in what you get as a member based on the level you pay, but about a third of the jurisdictions, this is important enough to them that they want to invest more. I mean, it really is just they want to contribute more resources to the work the coalition's doing so that we can be more effective with our lobbyists and with all of the other advocacy work we're doing to produce these outcomes. And so we just created a system that makes that really easy. But we don't arm twist, we make it as easy as possible for anybody who wants to contribute more to do so, which is the reason we came up with this chart, these levels, but it doesn't affect. Everybody has exactly the same vote, everybody has the same influence, everybody can participate in committees in exactly the same way.
So there's no benefit?
No, this is really just a way for communities that want to give more to make it super easy to do so. And if you had told me this before I started working with the coalition about a year ago, if you had told me this was true or likely to be true before I had started with the coalition, I would have been very skeptical. But it turns out a lot of the members really do want to demonstrate to their communities that they're contributing more, or they just think the value they get by being part of a coalition of like-minded jurisdictions trying to have an impact on state policy, that they're willing to contribute more than they have to be a member. Yeah, so there's no difference at all in what members get as a result of this. The base is all you have to do, and if you become a member and you ever decided you want to contribute more, you could, but we'll never try and coerce or harass or twist your arm into doing so. I will stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions you all have about any of this and explain anything about how we do things or whatever else is on your mind, whatever else is helpful to you in making a decision.
Questions? Well, I'm going to go first. So I'm just wondering, can you just, well.
No, Jenny had raised her hand, but it was after.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Please go ahead. Yeah, sorry. I just want to know how the policy comes about. What is the process for you to implement a policy that you back?
I'll go back one step to the adoption. I don't know how the policy agenda was crafted in the first place, but I imagine it was some smaller group of jurisdictions than we have now that sat around a table like this and batted around a bunch of ideas and finally came to, okay, here's our policy agenda. What we've done since then, like what we did at the retreat in June, this one-day retreat of all the members, is take last year's and just go through it piece by piece and figure out, is this still right? Do we want to make adjustments to it? Have circumstances changed in a way that makes us think we should adjust this language here or whatever? The policy agenda the steering committee adopted at this retreat in June is really similar to the previous one, but it's got a bunch of those kind of small updates. So in general, I would say that feels fairly stable. So that's why I say if the policy agenda as it is does not sit well with you, then it's probably not a good fit, at least not now. Once we've adopted that, then at that retreat, we also picked out a small number of the top priorities. Here are the things we're going to invest the most resources on over the next year. One of those was on these we knew these passenger vehicle standards were coming up. They were kind of in motion, so we said that's going to be a real priority for us. Another is on codifying. The state has these, right now it has one set of long-term greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, but they're not codified in statute. So one of those priorities is let's make those actual statute passed by the legislature so they survive beyond any given gubernatorial administration, and let's figure out an actual plan to begin moving toward those. And then the other is it's focused on the state's inventory. The state did an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. It's been a long time though, and some of the methodologies are outdated now, and it's really hard for anybody to figure out what's working and what isn't, so we can focus on the things that actually make a difference and don't waste time or money on the things that don't. So that's the other bill that the other piece that we're really focused on, which is really the form of a bill this time, would direct CDPHE to do a new inventory and give them some guidelines on how to do it in a way that's going to provide data that's useful to local governments who want it and will provide good information to the state for a while. So the group, as a group, settled on those priorities. For each of those, we basically crafted a plan, a strategy, and then we're implementing that strategy. And the strategies have a mix often of legislative pieces and executive branch and regulatory or whatever the right tools are. And then we have all those other policy items on the policy agenda. It's mostly opportunistic on the rest of them. We don't want to try and do everything because it's a small group. We're lean. Let's focus on a few things and really make progress there. But when there's opportunities to advance any of those other policy items, we take advantage of it. If there's a bill that's moving and we think that local elected voices can make a difference in that bill passing, then that's a place where we'll weigh in. We'll get some local electeds to show up at the legislature and testify or talk to reporters or whatever the right strategy is at that time. And so it's on the rest of those things, it's more opportunistic. Let's advance them when we can, but we want to keep our focus on a small number of things so we can make progress. Is that answering your question?
It doesn't, and it's more about, you have to have a unanimous vote amongst your committee?
Yes,
yeah,
I'm sorry, yes. On the policy agenda, that's the sort of core of how this works is we come up with that agenda, we do it at the retreat so that every jurisdiction is there, and at the retreat we come up with what we think is going to work. Everybody's there and they have a sense of what their own councils and boards where they're at, and then just to make sure everybody goes back to their council or board of county commissioners and says, here's what we came up with. We just want to make sure everything's good here. Hopefully it is, because it's at that point, it'd be a lot of work to go back, change something, and then go back to everybody. So we work really hard to make sure when we come out of the retreat, we've got something everyone's comfortable with. But there wouldn't be anything in the policy agenda that every member community didn't feel okay with having in the policy agenda. Just to reiterate what I said before, it doesn't mean we expect every jurisdiction to believe strongly and energetically in each of those items, but they're generally supportive and there's nothing in there that they really have a problem with. It also doesn't impose any mandate on any local jurisdiction. There's nothing in here that's set in the policy agenda that says you have to adopt a policy locally to require X or to do Y. These are all state policy questions, and that's the point. The point is we want to shape state level policy, and let's figure out how best we can leverage all of our resources to do that.
That answered a few questions.
Excellent.
Thank you. Sorry, Jen, go ahead.
Thank you. So first of all, Jake, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
This It's really, really exciting to have CC4CA in the room and to really have this discussion.
Thank you.
I do have a question, not for you specifically, Jacob, but for Heather.
Sure.
Is this the place where we are seeking consensus for the policy agenda to move forward?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then I have a number of comments as well. So, as you all know, about a week and a half ago, I was in Los Angeles for the National League of Cities. And you've probably seen on the news that there is one of the deadliest and worst wildfires raging across the state. As I stood in Los Angeles, I could see the smoke, I could smell it, and there was even ash coming down from the sky, which was really scary. And it reminded me of the kind of wildfires that we have in Colorado. And this year, as you all probably also know, we saw some of the worst wildfires that Colorado has ever seen, so much so that the state legislature had to allocate an additional $40 million to help manage those wildfires. And that's $40 million that could have been put into addressing our transportation problems. It could have been put towards education as well. And so I think, you know, the fact is, I think it's important that we first acknowledge that climate change exists and that it is impacting our residents every single day. I even think about our first responders and the fact that, you know, temperatures are rising and that fires are hotter than they ever have been before. And those first responders live right here in our community in Northglenn and work just down the road. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there are impacts on those folks as well as us. You know, as far as I'm concerned, climate change is a very lived experience, and it's on every single one of us as community leaders on the front lines to be bold and to address the frequent and severe impacts. And unfortunately, we can't just wait on politicians in Washington to solve our problems right here in Colorado or right here in Northglenn, because right now all that's being offered are threats to cut funding and rakes, and neither of those are particularly effective. At one of our previous meetings, it was suggested that there aren't immediate climate impacts on our residents. And I know that and as such, it wasn't necessarily important to invest in becoming a part of this group. And so tonight, I want to take a moment to pause and to share some of the examples with everybody for what exactly climate change looks like and how it impacts our residents right here in Northglenn. So first, some of the human impacts. The American Lung Association tells us that toxic pollution in the air that we breathe is affecting the health of nearly half of all Americans, and that means that we need new and better solutions. Kids seem to carry inhalers as often as they do lunch boxes. Seniors are stuck inside when the weather shifts dramatically to extreme heat or to freezing cold. And you all may remember the summer, it was pretty hot, and we had a lot of days over 90 degrees and a lot of days over 100 degrees. And those high temperatures increase the range of disease-carrying insects and raise the rates of heart stroke and cardiovascular, respiratory, and kidney diseases. Additionally, higher levels of air pollution and allergens exacerbate respiratory diseases such as asthma, which I mentioned. There are also a number of severe storms and weather events that increase the incidence of death as well as the rates of intensities and injuries, which again we're seeing play out as far as some of the wildfires. Additionally, direct and gradual physical impacts on the environment, society, and infrastructure can lead to trauma, shock, stress, anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. Climate change strains our water and our food system and increases food and waterborne infections. There are also health consequences from climate change that disproportionately, again, impact children, the elderly, and low-income populations who have less access to vital resources. When it comes to the economy, severe weather takes a toll on municipalities like Northglenn's ability to pay to protect and restore local infrastructure. Local economies like ours suffer from weather-related expenditures, business interruption and loss of employment. Droughts drive up water bills for families, cities, and businesses. Heat waves increase energy demands and costs for businesses and families, particularly again for low income and some communities of color. Climate change patterns alter agricultural productivity, threatening the industry and farm workers' livelihoods, which then increases the cost of goods right here in our city. And there's a changing growing in seasons and more frequent droughts pose threats to food security and nutritional quality of the food that we're all consuming. A couple other additional impacts on Northglenn and our citizens. Again, think about hail and just how terrible some of the storms that we've had in the recent years have been. They damage our buildings and our infrastructure and our public spaces and reduce or temporarily prevent access to important services like power, our fire and police, and emergency health services, as well as public transportation, which again impacts our residents' our residents' budgets. Air pollution's impact human health is unsightly and can damage trees, lakes, and rivers and accelerate the decay of buildings. And emission from vehicles and power plants can cause algae blooms, which we've all seen at Croak Reservoir. Reduced snowpack results in less runoff, adversely impacting our water supply. We've had many conversations about drought this year as a council and even initiated voluntary reductions in the amount of water that people were using. Drier winters hamper the ability of aquifers to refill, which put a stress on underground water supplies. And it's for all of these reasons and more that I very much support Northglenn joining with other municipalities and counties in taking bold action and building power through the other like-minded cities and counties that share our concern and our belief that we can and must do more. When I was elected a year ago, I didn't quite know how a small city like Northglenn could do anything about climate change. I thought that it was something that, again, our federal government really had to do, but the truth is we can do something in Northglenn, and it's our responsibility to do that. So I very much support this policy agenda and ask that all of you pass it and help us show in Northglenn that as a small city we can do big things. So that's all I have.
I appreciate that you came, prepared. I really do. So here's where I struggle. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you. I'm sorry. Here's where I struggle. We already have Jeff, right? Can you maybe the residents would like to know why we're going to pay one legislator who goes who works for us on behalf, and now we want to pay another legislator to do the same, maybe not on climate change, but to basically do the same job that we're already paying Jeff for. And I can tell you, my guys are going to turn around and look at it and go, that's really great, but you just raised the price on my water, on my this, on my that, Why am I paying two salaries? So although this is a group, fundamentally it's another salary that we're paying on top of Jeff's. And I know that the dollar amount is not huge, but maybe you could explain to the residents why you feel that need.
Yep, so I think that I already did explain why we need to invest in pushing back against climate change, but to your point about the lobbyists.
That's more my point.
Jeff, who is our lobbyist, is paid certainly more than $35,000 a year, and his role is to protect our municipal interests as it pertains to, I believe, local control, as well as the other items that are outlined in the policy guide. His expertise, while it is vast, does not cover the environment. And so I think that a $5,000 investment in paying people who are experts and paying to be a part of an organization that has, 21 jurisdictions who are all like-minded and all taking action allows us to be significantly more powerful and to have a better voice at the Capitol. And I think that does warrant a small investment.
And I agree with you that it is a small investment. I think my other question, as being a small community, and I understand, I do understand climate control. I don't want to sound, I do know what's going on. I'm totally there for it. Don't look at my car when we leave, okay? Why, and again, for our residents, why would we not wait, and I know waiting is terrible, for Denver, some of those other larger municipalities, Aurora, Denver, things like that, to get involved also before we put our foot in first. I know that that's kind of a backwards way of thinking, But those communities have more residents, more money, more that they can afford, you know, that they can put into it or afford to put into it. So,
I mean, I guess I can't speak for the rest of council, but my initial feeling is that if we know that we have a problem in Northglenn, we should be solving it. We shouldn't be always looking to Denver to take care of problems, right? I think it's going to take a regional approach to fix this problem, but quite frankly, I think that every city across America should be concerned about climate change and taking action. And I just, you know, I respectfully reject the idea that we have to wait for the big cities to do it. Northglenn is not a bubble, and we are impacted by everything that's going on around us, and that's why we have to take action right now.
the reason, in case you're confused, in case you're wondering, the reason I'm asking you the question is because you're prepared. You know what I mean? So I feel that you are the most knowledgeable person on this subject to talk about it.
I don't know that I'm certainly the most knowledgeable. I think I'm passionate about it, which I hope that that's coming out because I've said this time and time again. I think that we have to take action, and I don't want to wait. And I think that just because we're small, if I am bringing back anything from the National League of Cities, it is a feeling that just because we are small does not mean that we can't get things done and that we shouldn't take action.
Okay, and then my last thing that I want to say, and then I'll be done, is I want to make sure that we are actually thinking that this is for the city of Northglenn, and as rude as this is going to sound, and I'm going to say it, not that, you know, particular members are getting their name onto a document, that we are actually thinking of this for the city of Northglenn, not a stepping stone, not something to be able to say that, you know, well, I participated in this. I want to know that we're doing it for the right reasons, and that's all I'm asking, you know. A lot of times as council people, we get caught up and wrapped up in our own personal agendas, and I'm not saying this is your own personal agenda because this is the agenda of the earth right now. I'm just saying that I noticed that the legislative committee is the ones that are going to create the subcommittee. I noticed that, you know, and I get that because you all are much more involved than some of the other ones, or we'd be involved in that committee. I get that. My statement is I want to make sure that this is for the right reasons, and it's not just for self-publication, and that's not directed at you, okay? So those are my thoughts on it. $5,000 is not a huge amount of money. The only thing I have a problem with is it the right place? $5,000 is not a lot of money. It's not going to fix the lift station. It's not going to fix any of our other problems. But is it the right place to spend $5,000 right now? I know it's minimal, but is it the right place? Go ahead.
Thank you. So I think first and foremost, I understand that those comments weren't directed at me, but they feel like they were. And if doing the right thing for our residents means that I have an agenda, then I have an agenda. And, you know, $5,000, you're right, is not very much, but Becky, it's already been allocated in the budget. It's already done. So what we are doing here is talking about the policy agenda, and if we all can get on board and able to move forward with that agenda.
Oh, I thought from our last meeting we were actually discussing whether this was something that we wanted to participate in.
No.
Okay, I misunderstood that. Well, in that case, then I think it's really a moot point, right? It's in the budget, it's allocated. It's a moot point whether we agree as a group to move into this. I mean, we're already there. We've budgeted it, we've allocated it. If this is just my own personal opinion, then we're there. We're there. I mean, the decision's been made.
And I think you were absent the night that we voted on.
I was probably taking care of my dad.
Yeah, you weren't here, so.
Okay.
So that's your disconnect, but, okay. Anybody else?
But I think regardless, we still, as a council, need to approve the policy statement for the organization. So it's still going to be coming back to us. I don't know when.
So you don't have to ask my permission.
Don't want to be rude. So this is the first time that we've become a member of an organization, to my knowledge, where you're asked to support a policy agenda. So a couple of options for council. First and foremost, the steering committee, the recommendation from the legislative committee is to have the legislative committee form a subcommittee. So that's one decision point for discussion tonight. The second piece is you can go about this one of two ways. I can bring a resolution back to council at a future regular council meeting and you formally pass a resolution in support of the policy agenda, or you provide consensus this evening and then move forward with proceeding, having the city have a membership in 2019. You take the year to assess the value of that membership, because that was part of the discussion that council had on October 22nd, was to take a year and really try the membership out for size and see if it's of benefit to the organization. But you do need to make a decision on who's going to represent the city on the steering committee, and then really establish an expectation of what that communication looks like between, if it is a subcommittee of the legislative committee, what that report back looks like to council as a whole moving forward. Because this is a unique organization compared to the other organizations that we're members of in terms of having this policy agenda. And so part of what I did in working with Becky and Brooke was we went through the policy agenda and tried to do as much of a gap analysis as we could in a short amount of time. And I really, as I mentioned in the memo, believe that several of these items are aspirational for Northglenn. We recently, council adopted the sustainability plan in September, and even many of those items, there's a connection, and some of those items are aspirational, and we have to work as a staff internally to really prioritize and determine what can we accomplish, recommend to accomplish in 2019 based on that $25,000 that we have budgeted in the general fund budget, along with the $35,000 that we have budgeted to do a greenhouse gas study next year. So I really view us as very at the elementary stage, if you will, compared to some of these other communities that are far more advanced, if you will, in terms of they've been in this arena for a much longer time than we have. So that's just a note on the gap analysis. But going back to the original question, what needs to be decided tonight is who you want to represent the city on the steering committee. And then if you want to have a formal resolution brought forward for council to consider on the policy agenda, we can do that at a meeting in December. Or if you want to base it off of consensus tonight, we can also do that.
Okay, extra question. So if we pick somebody to represent the city in this organization this next year, we don't need to go through the previous process where, wasn't that all based on the resolutions when we all were elected? Of who was like, who decided to what committee? Wouldn't we follow the same process?
Yeah, we would. I didn't think about that. So I would recommend that you're consistent.
Yeah, quite cool. That's good. So a quick question for you, Jacob. And one thing that I'm trying to get a sense of, and I know that you guys are a newer organization, but besides the recent vehicle emission decrease win, what other wins or what other, I don't know, I guess, initiatives or, you know, what other work have you guys been doing in the past couple of years?
Yeah, sure. In this last legislative session, which, as you know, was a split, the chambers were split, and that made it difficult for legislation of any kind to get through. Even so, we were able to help pass 2 bills on energy storage, battery storage, which will make it easier for utilities and for individuals that want to invest in storage to go along with their solar panels or whatever other renewable energy source they're using. Make it easier for them to do that. That's one of the barriers to renewable energy, to scaling renewable energy at a higher level than we have now. So that's an example of where we had an opportunity to bring some local elected voices to the table, and somehow miraculously, given the political environment, the state Senate and state House, Republicans, Democrats were able to figure out how to pass a bipartisan bill that's actually consequential. So there's examples like that of bills that were in play where we were able to bring something to the table. There's also been a series of, it's almost like setting up for when the opportunity will really present itself, which very much feels like 2019 now. We're very much nonpartisan. I mean, we are entirely nonpartisan, but it's clear that Democrats in the governor on the first floor and then in the two chambers creates opportunities on climate action that haven't existed while they've been in split chambers. So we've been doing a lot of things to make sure that when that window presents, as it seems to have just happened or will happen, that we are really well positioned to take advantage of it. So for example, Representative Hansen last year had this series of a special committee on climate change. And we made sure we had local voices that were really prominent during those committee hearings so that when the legislators themselves are thinking about, okay, what kinds of bills do we want to run? What kinds of problems do we need to help solve at the local level on climate? Where do local voices fit on this? We were very prominent in that process. We've done a bunch of work over the last couple of years with other legislators in the same way. How do we set bills up so that, or policy ideas up so that when the window presents, we're able to do that? And I mentioned one of our priorities this year in this next session is a bill that will tell the state to do a new inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. So figure out what's actually happening, have we made progress or not, and what's working and what isn't, so we don't waste time on stuff that isn't. And we've been working on that bill now for a while, so we made sure that we've been working with the state senator that introduced a similar version of the bill in this last session. We've been working with her to make sure we get the language right and accommodates concerns of local governments. And we're now working with her on what the actual final language will look like. So we've been doing all that kind of stuff precisely so that when the window presents itself, as it clearly will in some fashion in 2019, we can take full advantage of that. One other example I'll give is there are lots of these coalitions that form around specific kinds of bills, and the best example right now is around there's going to be some kind of big marquee bill to put some kind of a cap or limit on carbon pollution. And there are tons of different groups that are involved. There are the environmental groups and the conservation groups and the climate groups, and there's like ag group, like there's a whole bunch of players that are in some fashion touching that because they're aligned in general, but they're also really concerned about their own constituencies and concerns, make sure the bill doesn't harm their constituency. So we've been, even last year, we were part of those conversations, and now this last 3 months or so, and it's really been picking up steam, especially since the election. We've been at the table making sure that whatever that bill ends up looking like, which is a whole bunch of groups that are we don't control, but we can have some influence over. We're making sure that local concerns are part of that. Like, for example, one concern for CC4CA is that whatever happened with a carbon cap or emissions cap bill, that it not happen in a way that disproportionately harms low-income communities or communities of color that are often positioned in places where even little bits of additional expenses can have these rippling amplified effects. And that's true not only in the Front Range, but rural Colorado very much as well. So we've been very present there to make sure that that stuff gets momentum early, make sure we're shaping that conversation so that when the bill actually takes form, it looks a lot more like local communities who care about these issues want it to look.
Right, thank you. I think I'm still trying to get a sense of where we would fit in with this organization. And one thing that I do see it as is very similar to some of the organizations that we currently sit on, so like NADA, so Northern Area Transportation Alliance. It's essentially just the northern cities who come together. We wanted to have a group to talk about and advocate for better transportation options for our area. We're working on that. But, I think it's important that Northglenn has a role to play. I mean, we're small when it comes to the transportation world. We have a little bit of I-25, so we have that little bit to play with. But I think it's still important that we're a voice in the process. And that's how I kind of see our relationship with this organization is, yeah, we're small. Maybe we have a smaller impact, but we're still doing what we can to, make a little bit of difference and join the team, if you will. when it comes to, join that team as it continues to grow. And I expect it to continue to grow as more and more of our residents become more concerned about, specifically these issues. My final question that I was hoping that maybe you might be able to just kind of clarify for me a little bit, and it was brought up actually by my fellow council members, was how do you see CC4CA different, or how do you function in a different way than like CML, advocating for our city at both the state and federal level?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. You raised a similar question. And I'll start by saying every one of these jurisdictions that is a member asks the same. Yeah. It's a really important question. We are part of CML, or the counties are part of CCAT or CCI. What's the value of joining another organization? It's a very legitimate question, which clearly they've all asked that and answered it. There's a couple of things. One is that, well, it's very much what you mentioned, Councilor, that because CC4CA is exclusively focused on this one issue, it means that when at the legislature, when our lobbyists are representing CC4CA, it is very clear who they're representing, what those interests are. They don't have to juggle, I'm asking this legislator for help on 7 different issues that are important to, say, Northglenn, the way that Jeff has to do for you all, as every one of these communities, their own lobbyists have to do for them. Our lobbyist, who doesn't represent any environmental groups, it doesn't represent any groups that do this kind of, it's this actually really interesting scenario where they happen to be really literate and technically savvy and policy savvy on these issues. They just don't have any other clients that do this stuff, which is part of why we selected them. Whoever they're talking with, that person knows these lobbyists, 2 of them that work together, represent local communities on climate. So if they're in the room, there's no question what they're there for, and our lobbyists don't have to do any of that balancing. I don't want to ask for too much on this because I also need this other thing from them. So that's part of what's different. Another piece of what's different is a group like CML. CML takes positions, I'm willing to bet, CML takes positions that, some positions at least, that you all wouldn't support. And maybe they don't ever take positions that you hate, I don't know. But they certainly take positions that wouldn't be the one you would take. When I was mayor in Golden, we're willing to be members of CML because there's so much value in it. But we know sometimes CML is not going to take the position we would want to take. In this case, we've designed it on purpose so that can't happen. Every member is at the table with this ability to make sure the policy agenda that we adopt is consistent with that jurisdiction's policy interest and goals and values and other concerns. So another difference is it can't happen that you get misrepresented, or represented with a view that isn't exactly what you would hold. And the last piece is all of those examples are really legislatively focused, and a lot of what we do is these other venues as well. And just to go back for a moment to that Air Quality Control Commission, that example, the low emission vehicle standards, it's largely a regulatory process. So now the Air Quality Control Commission adopted these. They're now about to pivot to the next step in this process, which is a set of standards around zero emission vehicles that help facilitate the availability of electric vehicles around the state. That's entirely a regulatory, this executive branch process, and unless your lobbyist, very few municipal lobbyists, in my experience, play in the regulatory space. They really do focus on the legislature because that takes a lot of effort in its own right. We're playing in all of those spaces so that all of the jurisdictions who are members, their voices are mattering there, and we're able to, in the same way, leverage the footprint of all these jurisdictions to have impact in all of those other venues as well. You're welcome, certainly.
Can I just piggyback on that really quick? Would you see that changing, though, as the membership got larger? I mean, CML can't do it because they've got 272 people or cities they're representing, so how do you can't enforce mandatory consensus on something. So
no, I think that is...
How does that look once you get larger, I guess?
I think that's a really astute question, and that's at the heart of what makes CC4CA work the way it does. I think there's a limit on how big we can get. I think it's going to change over time as more and more communities become more engaged around climate. Those impacts are very real. they're already very real. Like if you had listened to the testimony, if you'd heard the testimony that CC4CA elected officials gave at the Air Quality Control Commission last week and at the previous hearings, you would have heard like Commissioner Jill Ryan from Eagle County. She talked about how they almost lost 2 of their towns, and I'm forgetting the name of the fire, but it almost took out El Jebel and Basalt. I mean, they had multiple fires in Eagle County, and the Boulder County representatives talking about they did a study to assess what the actual cost to the county is likely to be because of climate change over the next couple of decades because of bridges and roads that get washed out as a result of flooding and asphalt that isn't designed for Dubai-like temperatures, except the summer temperatures, number of 100-degree days are growing really quickly on the Front Range. So all of their asphalt is going to be, I mean, everybody's asphalt on the Front Range is going to be exposed to these increasing temperatures that weren't part of the design parameters. So they have these really large numbers. I mean, I think Boulder County was predicting something like 20 or 30 $1 million of extra infrastructure costs over the next couple of decades just from those impacts. So we place that policy agenda front and center because that's the thing that prevents this. As more and more communities, I think, experience those impacts, become more aware of them, and become comfortable with a policy agenda that sets out the things you see in that agenda, I think those communities will start to join. But I'm not here making this impassioned plea for why you should join. I think it makes a lot of sense to join if you agree with that policy agenda. That's the thing we do to make sure we don't end up in this problem you're describing. We could relax the standards or something like that, but I think that actually takes away our power. This is a group of communities that every single person out there knows has unanimous support for that agenda. And as support for that agenda grows more widely, we'll add more members, but we don't want to grow faster than that support's there, because it would weaken our ability to get things done for the membership and around these goals. I hope that...
No, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, Marcy, sorry.
So, as I was trying to find information, I went on the website, and I'm just wondering, is it something that you can provide to us for an annual report or a 990? Because as a nonprofit, you don't have either of them on your website?
No, no, we don't, and yes, we could. So CC4CA is hosted by an existing nonprofit called the Rocky Mountain Climate Organization. So they're basically our fiscal sponsor. I'm sorry?
I might have missed that part.
Well, and I think we say it on the website, but we don't have their 990. So I can certainly get those and provide them to you.
I think I'm interested in your financials.
Well, our financials are part of those, but I'm also happy to share, I mean, our budget, all that stuff's public, so I'm happy to share any.
Send it along. Yeah, that'd be great.
Certainly.
And then 2 other things, and I really was only going to bring up the budget conversation, but in 3 years, to me, while I agree it's not always that we should be waiting for some other city for us to take the lead, I also think in 3 years I would have had an expectation that there would have been other Adams County cities. And so for me, that puts a pause into wondering, well, how come in 3 years somebody hasn't taken notice in those other cities of the efforts that you've been doing? So it just gives me a little bit of a pause. And then lastly, I have to tell you didn't win anything over making the 2019 comments. So I wasn't the biggest fan on this, and so...
Oh, you mean just the election outcome?
Yeah.
No, that's fair, although if you go through that policy agenda, I mean, that's where it comes from.
Gotcha.
We actually are, I mean, there are members of both parties and, the independent flavor as well across the membership. But from looking at the legislative agenda, if you go through that policy agenda, we know these are bills that we were able to pass in the House, but not in the Senate. So it is fundamentally nonpartisan, but here's the path to getting some of these policies adopted. That's all that is. And I also think that's where there may be some opportunities at the federal level. Senator Gardner, as an example, clearly cares about some of these issues, and I think there may be opportunities to work with him, especially because the Congress is now split, which means there's going to be potentially some effort for bipartisan legislation at the federal level. That may open up some opportunities to work with some Republicans in Colorado that actually do care about these issues, where there's an opportunity to build some support around some of these agenda items.
Are there any other questions? All right, so if there's no questions, the first question for us is there consensus to approve the policy committee of the CC4CA?
Yes.
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 I'm good.
Yes, and just, sorry, point of clarification, this is for this upcoming legislative session. And
Yeah.
nothing will change out of what we were provided this evening.
That's right. We once a year, we revisit that, and that's in June. And we actually, so we think of it as a 12-month planning horizon, so to speak, but starting in the summer, really, so that we're able to work on stuff over the summer, and then it carries us all the way through the session, and then after the session, we pause again and check in on that agenda and update it. So yes, that is absolutely the agenda through the next retreat in June.
And if you were to change something, say, you take out this Representative Jared Poulos and you would then address it to Governor Jared Poulos, you would inform us of the changes that took place within this document that we approved.
Yeah, and you're talking about the policy agenda. Yeah, nothing in that would change without every member agreeing to a change. So basically the idea is that's specific enough that then all the people in the different committees and our lobbyists and me, we know what our marching orders are. Our job is to advance policies that fit with what's in there, and that's what we go off and do. And then there's lots of feedback mechanisms, the committee, so there's lots of checking back and forth to make sure everything's still aligned. But unless the steering committee changed something in that policy agenda, which would require unanimous consent of every member of the coalition, that doesn't change. It won't change until the steering committee revisits it at the retreat in June.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we'll be informed of these changes if they shall occur.
More than
based on the
informed.
steering
You would be,
committee.
your consent would be required.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. Then the next topic would be the steering committee. The legislative committee has recommended that a subcommittee of the legislative committee represent the city on the steering committee. Is there a discussion on that before we?
Should we just have like a regular resolution about the one person who's going to support? I mean,
I think that's part of this.
versus having, because I mean, the legislative committee is 3 people, so a subcommittee of the legislative committee is going to be.
I'm glad you said it, 'cause that's my question.
Smaller.
I was wondering the same thing, so, okay. So are you guys all okay, are you okay with appointing one person? Yes.
It has to be correct. Yeah,
Yes.
just one person, because we have one vote, one person.
Yeah, in some cases, and this is totally legit, communities have more than one person who represents them on a committee. The member still gets one vote, but it allows for, if somebody's traveling, or there's just 2 people that together are a really good, they're the right 2 people to have on that committee. So it's totally okay to have more than one person on a committee representing your jurisdiction, but together they have to vote together.
Yeah, so maybe we should do similar about how we have voted it.
So I would assume you would love to be. Of course, all right, that's fine. And then is there interest in somebody being an alternate? Oh, no alternate.
It's gonna be Jordan, because you're on the legislative committee and you're gonna be a little busy
I'm busy.
soon. You're gonna be really busy.
Out of that one.
Yeah, you can add me as the alternate.
Right, it's just the 3 of you, right?
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
I think we could have any alternate though, if there's anyone else who's interested.
From our perspective, it doesn't matter.
We don't need an alternate. I mean, I think that.
Yeah, that's true.
We have a lot of memberships where we don't have alternates. Sometimes people miss meetings. It's
fine.
I think that that's okay. So, all right, so we will have Jenny nominated to be the representative. Is everybody on board, consensus for that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Was there one more thing? What am I forgetting?
No, you cover the policy agenda, you cover the steering committee member, so we'll schedule the appointment of the steering committee member to come back to council on December 10th. Sounds good.
And then, Mayor, just one other option I think you have at that next council meeting, a formal resolution, however you want to do it's fine, but in some cases, communities just do it as a motion. From our perspective, what we care about is that the body clearly express its support for that policy agenda, but the actual mechanism, whatever makes more sense to you. So if you'd rather do a formal resolution, I don't know what you had, at this point, what you had in mind, but you can certainly do that, but just know that some kind of clear expression of support, whatever that is, whatever makes sense for you.
Consensus in this meeting? Or
Okay, I think consensus in this meeting is fine, but maybe I misheard, but it sounded like.
I would rather do a resolution since we do that for every other appointed person. It's not a big deal for us to do it, so.
Just to give you
Appointment plus
options.
the resolution in
Yes.
support of the policy agenda.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. All right.
Great. Well, I very much appreciate your time. And we'll circle back with you in all the logistics stuff, but please feel free to reach out at any point to me or any of the other CC4CA folks if you've got questions or have ideas or anything like that. And if you're interested in doing trainings or if there's anything else we can provide you that helps you all plug into the work we're doing, please let me know. We'll do whatever we can to make that as easy as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And thanks
thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us tonight. Thank you
Sure.
so much
Thank
for your
you.
time. All right.
It was nicer weather than the last time I came by.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and we are adjourned.
Heather, I'm gonna have to steal like an entire